Alright, so alt history isn't really something that we plan on covering too much here at True History, but we thought for an opening episode it might be pretty cool. And out of all the scenarios that we could have picked, we went with how Germany could have won World War II. To truly understand how Germany could have won World War II, we need to understand the situation that they were in at the time. Leading up to the outbreak of the war, Germany underwent a massive program of rearmament and a vast rework of their economy and industry. The program was run by the German SS under the direct coordinated command of Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Hitler, who famously gave it the name of Reich Autobahn. Hitler's Reich Autobahn can be, in a way, compared with FDR's New Deal, as it focused heavily on the construction of infrastructure and the elimination of unemployment for those in the Nazi Party. It was different, however, in the way that almost all of their projects concerned the immediate needs of the Wehrmacht. Even before the Nazis officially were elected into office, the Nazi Party used their connections to grow large corporations, ensuring that they had a majority say in job offers and opportunities. Forming a sort of a union branch in the Nazi Party targeted at only giving jobs to their own was a rather risky move on Hitler's part, as it easily could have backfired due to public opinion. However, this did not pose much of a problem to the Nazis at the time, since the Depression was in full swing, and a business demanding you join their political party was not uncommon. What made the Nazi takeover of the German economy so easy was the fact that it had been firmly under their grip since 1905, and at this point was firmly devoted to the Wehrmacht, Kriegsmarine, and Luftwaffe, as well as any special military programs the Nazis wished to expand. This gave the Germans an undeniable early edge on the Allies, and allowed for them to dominate the first half of the war. Germany was also united and led in a way that gave one man absolute power, the ideology of fascism. Sparked by the Eco and later remodeled as Nazism, it dictated strict order and obedience, all cascading from the top, in this case from the Eco. The Eco chose to organize his government in two ways. First, militarily, he set aside a cabinet of generals and advisors specifically dedicated to the organization and happenings of the military, as well as bringing up the needs of the military and potential strikes and major campaigns which required the Eco's approval. This cabinet was under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, who was the ideological and leader head of Germany. The second way the Eco organized his government was in an economical sense, and this is where we run into one of Germany's earliest problems. One of the very few which came up pre-war, in fact. The issue lies in the fact that, as in the case of the military cabinet, he put generals and advisors in charge, but all were very biased towards the Wehrmacht, knew little of how to run an economy, and had only been put in this position due to them not being qualified enough to be on the front directly. This boils down to Germany not having enough of the right resources to make it through the war, and although they were highly efficient with what they did have, they did not take the necessary steps pre-war to ensure that the economy would run at acceptable or even exceptional levels. As the war went on, the problem only got worse and worse, gradually reducing their army's effectiveness. One of the last points I want to make before we move on is just how secretive the Third Reich was. Under the Eco's leadership, everything was sharply focused inwards, not really wanting to be leaked and fairly unwilling to make any sort of technological or ideological trades. This heavily impacted their relations with the world stage and set the tone that Germany was not interested in your alliance or cooperation, at least not in a fair way. This entire foundation of a one-man powerhouse and war economy focus remained true not only throughout the war, but also dated back from as soon as the Nazis took power. Their political and economical situation changed very little from 1933 all the way until March 15, 1938, and the outbreak of World War II. The first, and probably the least of Germany's deciding factors to defeat, was geography, and it's debated as to whether this even was a deciding factor. Germany got big, and I mean really big, before the outbreak of the war even started. Mostly through Anschluss, but also through conquest, Germany managed to acquire a significant portion of Europe that it then needed to guard from the Allies in the west and south. To give a quick run through, this is Germany from 1918 to 1937. And then this is Germany on March 15th, 1938, with the addition of Libya, Eritrea, Somaliland, and Ethiopia, which are not pictured on this map. While guarding and policing this territory was not much of an issue in and of itself, deciding who guarded what was something else. The tensions between the Wehrmacht, SS, and Polizei was fierce, and often the different ethnicities within the Third Reich demanded to be guarded and governed by their own people. This posed no real problem during peacetime, but as the war loomed closer, your local Ethiopians were not that keen on seeing Italians and Germans marching around, setting up defenses for a war they didn't really feel was necessary. The biggest problem by far, though, was presented from within the Nazi Party itself, and many feel that the division and secrecy that became rampant towards the end of the war had its beginning here. It revolved around Bulgaria, who wished to become a part of the Axis, and for once the members of the Nazi Party could not agree on how it should enter the Axis. Leading up to World War II, it seemed that the fight would be between the German Reich and Soviet Union, not the Germans and Allies. The struggle for Bulgaria had been whether or not it should join Germany or Russia. So far, when given a choice, countries had chosen Germany every time, whilst the Soviets had to conquer every inch of land desired. All of the countries previously squished between the two behemoths had already picked a side, and for just a brief moment it appeared that Bulgaria could ride this out. But of course the Soviets had something to say about that. Even as the Aryan-Polski War was drawing to a close, the Soviets publicly announced the completion of their naval testing and exercises, which focused on locking down the Black Sea as fast as possible and securing the coastline of either Bulgaria or Turkey in the event of war. This shifted the entire focus of tension back into the Balkans, and particularly on Bulgaria, as no one took the threat of a Soviet invasion into Turkey seriously, especially with the backing of the Allied powers. Bulgaria now had its hand forced, as the Soviet Union was fully mobilized and ready to act, so it pushed itself into the hands of Germany. The problem with this is that Germany didn't want Bulgaria. At least most of the German high command didn't. Most of the active strategists and generals rallying behind Hitler pressured the ECO to not accept the offer of annexation by Bulgaria, wishing instead to ensure their independence or pursue a defensive pact. Hitler and his coalition realized the threat that a front that far south could pose to their interests in Yugoslavia and Greece. Rather than accept land that the Soviets had a clear and ready-to-initiate battle plan for, Hitler wanted to prevent any sort of provocation against the USSR. Hitler believed that the war with the Soviets was just around the corner, and bringing Bulgaria into the fold would be risky and hard to protect. Meanwhile, most of the economists and businessmen under the ECO's control brought up their desperate pre-war need for resources. Bulgaria was already on a fairly moderate industrial growth rate before their annexation, and had a sizable military when compared to their neighbors, due to the threat of invasion from Turkey, Romania, and Yugoslavia. Of course, in the end, these men with the backing of Heinrich Himmler won over Hitler's group, even though they were far outnumbered. Himmler's men craved for more power, even if it was short-term, immediate power, and it was with the promise of vast production from the area that swayed the ECO in the end. Even though in retrospect we can look back and see that whether or not Bulgaria was included into the Reich mattered very little, the Germans didn't know that. This final argument over expansion fractured the trust and alliances that had been set up in the German high command, and simply left a tattered band of men united by the ECO. This divide violently ripped Germany into three groups. One under Heinrich Himmler, selfish and power-hungry, interested only in furthering the ECO's power if it furthered their own. Another under Adolf Hitler, staunchly devoted to serving the ECO and Germany, particularly its people, and wishing to preserve the ideology of Nazism. And finally, a completely disorganized third party with no direction or purpose until Germany started to lose the war, when they finally organized and sought to destroy the ECO and his power from within. Germany's second and far more dire problem was the poor planning concerning the resources needed to sustain their economy during wartime. Once the war actually kicked off, the Germans were masters at prolonging their limited supplies and even at acquiring more. The ECO and several of those in German high command, however, were immensely ignorant to the problems that faced them in this department until the Soviet Union declared war and effectively started the siege of the Third Reich, but by then it was too late. To be rather specific, Germany needed oil, and they needed it desperately. Unfortunately, even if you try to give Germany new objectives early into the war, the acquisition of the Caucasus wouldn't help that much, and in fact would hardly even prolong the war further. This is because Germany's needs at this point were so far gone that this newfound captured oil would barely be enough to help mount a stronger defense, never mind an actual offensive. At this point, for Germany's oil deficit to even come close to operational levels, they would need to push all the way into the Middle East, as well as securing the area and finding a safe way to ship it back home and around to the front. For Germany to even come close to the borders of Iraq and Iran, they would need vast amounts of oil in the first place, an unfortunate catch-22. Germany's final problem, that which caused them undeniable defeat, was their lack of allies and tendency to attract enemies. Germany fought alone throughout the entire war, and having a single ally would have helped beyond all measure, even just as a distraction. Thankfully, we have two countries which came very close to joining the German Reich in their struggle versus the world. The first and closest was Spain. Spain had been in a very complicated four-way civil war lasting for 2 years already at the start of World War II, and continued for another 2 years into the war. The fascist coalition under the leadership of Francisco Franco, with the backing of Germany, Italy, and Austria, pulled through enough before Germany cut off support that they were able to finish their civil war in late May of 1940. Franco didn't forget the invaluable help that the Germans had provided, and the decision to attack rather than help Germany almost ripped the country apart once more, this time between the Spanish SS and German sympathizers against those that wished to follow and support Franco in Spain. Although Franco did feel that he owed Germany a great debt, and that he also shared many a good ideal with Germany, he was concerned that Germany was not going to win the war, and even worse, that Germany would invade his weak nation for its strategic importance. Wishing to have the first moves on Germany, Franco coordinated with the Allies and declared war on Germany June 22, 1940. The Spanish SS surrendered to the German Wehrmacht almost immediately, and Spain was quickly overrun by the Nazis, making any decision on their part irrelevant. Next we come to Japan. Although not as close to joining Germany in their fight as the Spanish were, they were far more powerful, and still struggled a fair bit on whose side, if any, they should join. Japan, like Germany, was under the control of one man, and in fact admired many things about the Nazis and their government. This caused a rather strange blend of both fascist and monarchist policies to form and run the country of Japan, as well as pulling the nations of Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union directly into the crosshairs of Japan, who were also enemies of Germany. Unfortunately, there isn't really much that we can do here. In researching this topic for our video, it doesn't look like there's much of an improvement for Germany whether Bulgaria joins the Axis or not. Even in a best-case scenario, the conflicts and divisions that arose in the Nazi Party simply would have been prolonged to a later date, not stopped. The Eco was quite torn and indecisive at times, and was also rather inept when it came to keeping his party members in line. Now this is where it starts to get interesting and intertwined. Germany cannot on their own acquire any new resources that it desperately needs, without numerous battles and political events going in their favor. Too many to count on even for an alt history. However, if they stockpile their resources as was proposed in the 1936 Mare Nostrum plan organized by Karl Donitz, and fully stick to the strategical objectives listed by him, they could easily have seized key strategic locations and resource depots with the help of Spain. See, the plan proposed by Donitz leaned more towards an Axis lake strategy in the Mediterranean rather than a starvation strategy in the Atlantic. Using the Italian fleet as well as German and Vichy reinforcement fleets, they planned to shut down all Allied shipping throughout the Mediterranean. It also expected, with this newfound superiority in the area, for Gibraltar, Malta, Crete, and Cyprus to fall to the Axis, in addition to all of North Africa, including Egypt. Then an amphibious invasion into Syria, Israel, and Sinai Desert would ensue, with primary objectives being the seizure of the Suez Canal and Iraqi oil fields. While it is unlikely that Germany would have been able to push very far into Syria, Israel, and especially Iraq, the fall of Egypt is almost a guarantee, and the securing of the Mediterranean helps to ensure that all of Libya's oil is being properly exported. While not enough oil to cover all of Germany's problems, it is certainly enough to see them through tough times, as they had invested so much into the area pre-war. To be honest, I find it kind of rather bizarre that Germany did not place a higher emphasis on protecting their Libyan oil fields, due to the oil always being a problem, even before the Soviets declared war on the German Reich. Following Donitz's plan would have also led to the preservation of Germany's vast submarine fleet, allowing for Germany to continue to expand and develop their fleet. Meaning later on, when the fight for the English Channel kicked off in early June 1944, Germany could have completely prevented D-Day. But the problem here with acquiring more resources and expanding Germany's options is that you open an endless rabbit den of possibilities in alternate history. You could argue that with the extra oil and ships at their disposal, the Germans could have furthered their offensives in 1942 instead of being turned back. You could argue that in 1943 it wouldn't be an Operation Torch on the table, but actually a revised Operation Sea Lion. And you could even say that the German successes in Egypt encouraged further Arab rebellion in the east, allowing Germany to push forward and seize the oil fields in Iraq and possibly Persia, although I doubt that the Soviets would allow either of these two options. In any case, the disregard of Karl Donitz's plan by the ECO was a huge mistake, as it jeopardized their soft underbelly and reduced their effectiveness in the area concerning combat and resource allocation. It's our final problem that really brings out Germany to shine. The potential that Germany had in this time period and how badly they squandered it truly baffles me, and I almost see it as an accomplishment and a feat that they managed to throw even their last few friends to the side. Even in a realistic worst-case scenario, Germany should have easily have been able to convince both Spain and Japan to join their side. Asking for more allies, though, may be a bit of a stretch, and while I won't include them in this video, it is worth noting that Mexico may have been able to be convinced to join the Axis, although their overall impact to the war would be questionable due to their proximity to the United States. Spain, while certainly weak from their civil war, does bring three very important factors to the table. First, and most importantly, a morale boost to the German soldiers on the front lines. When Spain finished their civil war, there was a debate on whether or not to join Germany in their fight. Due to several factors, they opted instead to join the Allies. However, if Spain under Franco's leadership had instead decided to repay its debts to Germany and begin funding their war effort, Spain would likely officially join the Axis and declare war on the Allies in the USSR on June 22, 1940. The same day that the United States and Soviets declared war on Germany. This Spanish ally in southern Europe would have completely shattered the paralyzing fear that was slowly starting to grip Germany, the fact that they were fighting alone. This morale boost would soar throughout the German ranks, helping them to keep their heads high in the months to come. Second, Spain's navy had been relatively untouched during the Civil War, and would prove more than capable to help the Italians hold down the Mediterranean while Germany and Vichy France began to move out and begin the battle for the Atlantic, starving Britain of its resources. In addition, the Spanish, while weak, had a large army, which could be properly equipped with German weaponry and placed on the Atlantic Wall, relieving superior German units that could then fight in the east against the Soviet Union. And finally, Spain had two whole SS divisions that were well equipped, highly trained, and pretty much ready to move out due to their previous involvement in the Spanish Civil War. Then we come to Japan. Japan is a bit trickier since, in reality, they tried and then failed diplomatically with the German Reich. To be honest, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what made Japan not eager to join Germany's alliance, but I would personally suggest the previous inclusion of the Soviets into the Axis, which completely conflicted with their interests. Germany knew this, and it was silly for them to think that a long-term alliance with the Soviets could have worked. If Germany could have convinced Japan to put their war in China on hold to invade the Soviets, British, and French in the area, the war could have gone far different. Firstly, the Japanese would have launched a major push into Siberia and the Soviet Far East, with Germany knocking at the door of Leningrad, Stalingrad, Moscow, and the Caucasus oil fields in our timeline. The inclusion of the Japanese into the war forces the Soviets to fight on all sides, and ultimately leads to the fall of Leningrad, Moscow, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Stalingrad and the Caucasus would manage to hold out, at least for now, due to the Germans being stretched thin here even in their best case scenario. And so this is where most of what remained of organized Soviet resistance would flee. However, it is difficult to determine exactly what would happen in this sector, since Adolf Hitler or the ECO could very well strike a deal with the Georgians or Armenians in the area to incite rebellion and independence, further weakening the Soviet position. Meanwhile, back in the east, Japan will have pushed the Soviets and Mongolians all the way to Kazakhstan and Siberian forests, shattering the few Soviet units that remained. When the Soviets collapsed, the Japanese would likely stop their advance to once again focus on China and their other fronts. This has so many effects that it's not even funny. With the Soviet collapse in the east, Germany would leave a token force to mop up and occupy the rest of Russia, and a small garrison to guard their holdings, while the majority of their army either came smashing down through the Caucasus in late 1943 and early 44, and opening a whole new front of North Iraq and Persia, or Germany would move all of those troops west to France, Norway, Spain, Denmark, Belgium, and Holland to prepare for an Operation Sea Lion. Back in the east, Japan seizes everything they can to weaken the Western powers: Hong Kong, Indochina, Burma, Singapore, Malaya, Indonesia, and several of the outlying Pacific islands. Japan would then use its position to strike at both Australia in the south and the US in the east. I'm not going to lie here, Japan's campaign past a quick territorial grab would be a disaster. This is due mostly to Japan not having any surprise factor and them being surrounded on all sides. They would join the war, like Spain, on June 22, 1940. However, everyone expected this, and you must remember that the Soviet Union and the United States are also just entering the war. Japan at this point is fielding one of the largest and most advanced navies in the world, estimated at the time to just be behind the United States and Britain. Their army and air force were no pushovers either, even though they had been involved in a grueling war with the Chinese for 3 years now. Their issue is that they simply cannot sustain a push in all directions. Resources rapidly begin to become a problem, as with Germany. However, they can sustain themselves for the time being and have a good potential to capture what they need. However, Japan would be put on both Britain's and the US's top priority lists, due to Japan's dangerous push towards India and Hawaii. Japan would be brutally crushed, even though I hate to say it. While their advance into China and India would go well at first because of German help and strategical gains, it would soon stall, likely around 6 months after the Soviets collapse, when they start this campaign. And out in the Pacific, their situation would be even worse. They would quickly take all French, British, and Yankee positions in the area, possibly getting as far as Midway and the Aleutian Islands before the Allies begin to island hop towards Japan. While this may sound like it's starting to turn into a victory for the Allies, it's not. The Allies barely managed to take on Germany alone in our timeline, and that was without these new allies and Soviet bear holding strong. Japan would come to the forefront of everyone's attention, sapping away precious resources which would be needed for a proper defense of Operation Sea Lion. Even if the British wanted to strengthen their own defense rather than India's, they couldn't. Germany at this point in the war would have starved Britain to its knees, and would have a firm iron grip on the North and Eastern Atlantic. At the latest, Germany would be ready to launch Operation Sea Lion in late 1944 or early 45, and the Allies would be powerless to stop it. Britain would fall, and while yes, at this point Japan would have lost a majority of their navy in Pacific Islands, they would have held the line in Burma, northern Indochina, and China. Once Britain fell, Germany would have no issues pushing further into Africa and the Middle East at a snail's pace, and they would quickly reinforce Japan's efforts in China and India, possibly leading to an Axis victory in the area, although it's hard to say the further we stray from our timeline. And last but not least, Germany's enemies. Unfortunately, no, they cannot really be reduced. There isn't anyone that the Germans declared war on that we can take away and say it would drastically change the war in their favor, and in most cases it would actually hurt them. The only case we can think of would be in the Aryan-Polski War of 1938, if Germany subtracted a few of the targets or carved up the land in a way to where the Soviets got less, but that's a whole other can of worms. In any case, see y'all next time. True History signing off. Thanks to all of y'all for watching. Don't forget to like the video, leave a comment saying, "Yo, dudes, this is unrealistic," and subscribe to see even more ridiculous content. If you'd like to see more videos faster, visit our Patreon, where there are plenty of juicy perks for supporting the channel. Tune in for our follow-up video to this one in which we discuss what an Axis victory would look like based on these new conditions.